Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you all came. It's very nice to see so many familiar faces. We hope you enjoy yourselves and come with questions, as we have very knowledgeable professionals scheduled to speak. We wanted an informal setting that you can relax in and gain some information. Please feel free to come and go when you want. And also at 11 o'clock, we have 2 people coming with their massage chairs to help you relax even more. And you can do it as many times as you want. Nannie's going to introduce the next part.
Good morning to everybody. Welcome, all of you. I have bad news regarding our Congresswoman. She could not be here due to problems in Washington. She did send a video with information and beneficial to us all, and introduced myself, Lujan Grisham, the next new governor of New Mexico.
I'm Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham, and I want to thank Families and Individual for Change for inviting me to say a few words at this morning's conference. I really appreciate the opportunity to thank you for the very important work that you're doing to assure that every person has the right to live with dignity and respect and reach their fullest potential, and by making sure that we advocate for policies and resources that can make this a reality for every individual and every family. I also want to give a special shout out to both Rosemary and Nannie Sanchez, who I have literally known for more than a couple of decades. And I met them in exactly this context, where they were incredible advocates. They were fighting for change. They were making the case for independence and quality of life. They really worked on reshaping and reforming the way in which the developmentally disabled waiver works, and found ways to get the legislature, the New Mexico State Legislature, to really begin to identify resources and strategies so that you could eliminate altogether the waiting list and really focus on the individual aspects of success for every person, irrespective of their disability. And I want to thank you for that work. This morning, however, it is so valuable and so important that you really do talk about out-of-the-box solutions. And now more than ever, there is so much at risk. I'm ashamed that the state, like so many other states, finds itself in a situation that there are more people on a waiting list that could take more than 10 years for a person to become eligible, and a family, for any resources that help them have housing, have education, have a career, or for the family to get the kind of support that really makes the difference in their quality of life. Their very independence is at stake. Where our state has insufficient numbers of special education teachers in all of our public school system, where we're not meeting the requirements of IDEA, where we're not doing anything to provide support, awareness, and to help individuals navigate a really often cumbersome and way too bureaucratic system. If that isn't bad enough, we see what's happening now in Congress and in the federal government. We have a new education secretary that has basically said that states can make whatever decisions that they want. And in fact, Secretary DeVos, in a recent House hearing from the Education and Labor Committee on National Education Standards, said there was not a single situation in which a state would discriminate against a disabled student that she would be compelled to weigh in and prohibit that effort as the federal entity, which is exactly their job. We have members of Congress who are rolling back protections and requirements in the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we have members of Congress who support this ideology about not providing a fair and equal public education to all students, irrespective of their challenges and potential limitations. This is not about focusing on opportunity. This is about minimizing any support for families who are doing everything in their power to deliver that high quality of life. And I know a thing or two about that. My sister had a severe developmental disability as a result of surgery for a malignant brain tumor when she was just 2 years of age. She died when she was 21, but I watched my family fight for every single aspect of support that would make our family whole, but in addition, would make sure that Kimberly had the highest quality of life possible and that we were meeting her own desires for success. And today in Congress, I am carrying legislation called CareCore, which really recognizes the very unique caregiving issues that we are coping with in this country, and it moves away from Medicaid and Medicare. Not that we should not be putting resources in those two federal health insurance programs, but rather it really looks at making sure that families and individuals who are receiving support and care by their loved ones have another option, which is young people, creating a national service program, much like the Peace Corps, where individuals would be trained to be companions and champions and supporters and transportation advocates and drivers, and would provide that kind of daily support so that families can manage their caregiving responsibilities and not minimize their role as family members, and make sure that the caregiving issues don't create the kinds of issues where caregivers actually get sick and can't provide that daily support, or have to quit their jobs, or have to change significantly the way in which their daily lives work. So I am incredibly optimistic about the work that you're going to do, about the future. I know that there's no question that we're going to continue to move this country into a place of total equality and independence. And every idea that you identify or forge today will give members of Congress like me and advocates and policymakers in every state, including ours, the tools that they need to make the differences that are required and are only fair and right and just. Thank you for standing up for everyone. Thank you for supporting each other as families. And thank you again for inviting me. I only wish I could be there in person to participate, but I'm still in Washington, D.C. So I wish you the very best. And again, I want to especially thank Nannie and Rosemary Sanchez, who I know are powerful voices for change. Thank you.
Introduce Joan Curtis from Disability Rights is going to be our next speaker. She's been a big help to me the whole time that my son has gone through APS and on and on. In fact, in 1 year we spent 23 hours getting him from middle school to high school just in IEPs. It's a great resource. She has a great office, and she's going to give a little talk, and then you're free to ask any questions at all.
Yeah, I'm more comfortable down here with everybody rather than up on the podium. So I kind of want to have an idea of the kinds of things that you might be interested in, because I work at Disability Rights New Mexico. We're a legal rights organization for people with disabilities. We have attorneys and advocates, but we do a number of, we work on a number of issues. So again, we're made up of attorneys and advocates, and we only take certain kinds of cases, but it's sort of a spectrum of issues that we work on, things like voting, or things like folks that have traumatic brain injury, developmental disabilities, mental illness. We work on employment and education. So let me kind of get an idea from you of what things you might be interested in. Any of you in the audience, if you have disabilities, or if you have family members who have disabilities, is it mostly folks with developmental disabilities that we're talking about here? Or are there people that are interested in mental illness too? I see some nodding, okay. So let me just give you an idea of who I am, what we do, and see if I spark some interest for people who are in here. Again, as an advocate, actually I started as a special education teacher, and I was working down at Las Lunas Hospital and Training School. Well, let me ask you, are you saying that we can talk for an hour? You guys would be sorry if I talk for an hour. Oh, we're only half an hour, okay. So I worked as a teacher down at Las Lunas, and I was given the students that were the most severely disabled. And they had never been served. There was a big lawsuit in New Mexico, and it was from the ARC of New Mexico against the state, and it said it wasn't fair because there weren't enough occupational therapists, and everyone under the age of 22 should be served in special education, and they weren't. There were a lot of people at the institution that still weren't receiving services. So it really wasn't fair. Yeah. We're talking about in the 70s. And so at that point, there were some states that had accepted special education law. We were the last state to accept special education law. New Mexico was the last state. We were the Wild West out here, and we kind of had to have an incentive to get into special education. So what they did was they gave $100,000 to, there's a lot of rural school communities in New Mexico, and what they did, so if maybe there was only one person with special education in Jal, New Mexico, they would group together with the other school districts, and they would get $100,000. So New Mexico finally said, okay, we're interested in that. And it is a money bill, this special education law. So special education started to actually flow down to New Mexico. But I was there, I feel really lucky because I was there before this happened. And I found a lot of the students that weren't being served at all. I walked into a cottage and they were all in metal cribs with cloth diapers. Back then we didn't have disposable diapers. But they didn't even have clothes on, and they didn't have any stimulation. And I was only supposed to pick 6 of them to work with. I said, no way. I'm gonna pick everyone under the age of 22. Well, I ended up with 22 students. No aid, no curriculum, no classroom, no materials. And I had to steal my materials. I looked like an ant. I would carry giant bolsters over my head and tiptoe into a wheelchair closet where I performed, I started doing classroom activities and figuring out how to serve people that were lower functioning than others. And some of the people in my classroom might be an 18-year-old who was in a car accident after their senior prom and they could only move their eyes. And so that might be one of my students, and I had 22 students like that. Anyway, I've been able to watch the evolution of special education and serving people with developmental disabilities in New Mexico. Because then there was a class action suit that came about in 1986, and that came about from our office, from Disability Rights New Mexico. At that time, we were called Protection and Advocacy. And we filed a federal lawsuit against the state of New Mexico and said that a lot of the people who were being treated there, I would watch some of the people living in institutional lives, and there'd be 3 shifts, right? There'd be the morning and the afternoon and the evening shift. And in one situation, there was a bottle of antifreeze that a guy was working on his car, and the label had fallen off of it. And so he left it, after working on his car, he forgot about it and he left it on a table. And people, the The next shift came in and took the bottle and said, oh, somebody left the juice out, put it in the refrigerator. Third shift comes in and says, well, so-and-so really needs their juice. Took the antifreeze and started pouring it down this guy's esophagus, burned out his esophagus, okay? So things, just because of the nature of the institution, things like that started happening, or happened all the time. And so we had a lawsuit, Jackson lawsuit, and it's still going on. And a lot of people are really frustrated about the Jackson lawsuit. Are we wasting our money on that? But I want to let you know that one of the reasons why we kept it on was because we wanted to have a higher standard of living for people with developmental disabilities in New Mexico. And now, because we've kept it going, now if the state would find an expert witness that thought that the state was doing an adequate job, we could end that suit. But we can't end it because we keep bringing in these witnesses that are saying, this is not good enough. We still have people now living in the community that are dying because they aspirate easily maybe, and so they're choking on their food, and their plans are not being followed adequately. So we're trying to monitor those folks, and we continue to fight for better services. And one of the things that I can tell you is that there's a person in his 90s now from the Jackson lawsuit. We wouldn't have seen that years ago. So that person was able to live into their 90s. And we're bringing up the standard of services for everyone who has developmental disabilities. After we started the Jackson lawsuit, the number of people who were able to be on the waiver expanded. And what we did was we really built the infrastructure for the state, which allowed the Medicaid dollars to flow into community programs in the state rather than just the institution. Now I know those institutions closed. We didn't force the closure of that. What we did was that we expanded the services for people in the state. So remember that when you get frustrated about the fact that the lawsuit and our state still spends money on that. And for me, I'm very lucky because I've been able to see institutional life and those people that were in cloth diapers with metal cribs and no stimulation. I've been able to see those people live in the community and go to the public schools and live quality lives, which is just remarkable to me to be part of that evolution and part of history, and now work as an advocate for people who live in the community. So, as I'm saying, I have certain specialties. Mine are developmental disabilities, Medicaid, special education, and services for people with mental illness who are young, up to the age of 18, and living in residential treatment programs. I usually start my presentations for people with, I didn't bring this for this presentation, but I start with a video. Do you guys remember Geraldo Rivera? Well, Geraldo did an expose on the institutions across the country. And one of the places that he exposed to the media was Willowbrook. And after that happened, and they showed this expose and this picture of people that were being served in the institution and how horrible it was. You know, years ago, we used to experiment on people in the institutions. We used to inject them with diseases to see how it would turn out, with things like syphilis. Now we've gone from that type of situation, and because of the exposure in the media, what happened was Congress said, this can't happen. We can't be doing this to people who are citizens. And maybe they're lower functioning in some ways, but they still have rights. And so what they did was they created the Protection and Advocacies, the agency that I'm in now. Now it expanded, and Congress said, then there was another expose that happened in the 90s, and that was about kids with mental illness in residential treatment programs and how sometimes they were restrained and they died. Hundreds of children were dying because of the treatment they were receiving. There was no standardizing of how people were to be restrained. And you know, we still haven't standardized how to do that in the public schools. We have standardizing in the residential treatment programs, and from our agency, the advocates will go out there when we see people that are covered with bruises, and we make sure that they're following the proper standards. And we'll check on that and monitor that. But the schools, there's no standard for that. So what has disability rights been doing lately? What kinds of services have we been providing? Well, one of the things is the Jackson monitoring. That's that Jackson class action suit that we are still working on. Another thing that I think is really important is Medicaid. We work on Medicaid. So there are these programs like the DD waiver, and there's many people who covet that program. It's a good program. And it had been one of the best. Do you remember we had some problems with that program when the SIS came in? Do you remember the supports intensity scale? That was one of the ways that we were deciding how people scored on that test. And then they would decide what their budget was going to be. Well, we were starting to see people with Down syndrome who were suddenly being told, or people with serious autism who were being told, we're not going to provide a residential program for you anymore because you scored pretty well on that test. So we're not going to give you funding for that. So I started getting lots and lots of calls from across the state from you guys, from parents saying, that's not fair. My child, there was one guy with autism, and he could function well in some things, and he scored well on this test, but what happened, one of the times when he went to the zoo, he was in the race, running the race for the zoo, and he just didn't get it, and he kept running for miles and miles, and he ran off the course, and the police had to track him down and find him, and he was just exhausted by the time he was done with the race. That's the kind of person that they were saying, oh, he did well on the SIS, so the family doesn't get to have money to support him in the community with a residential program anymore. So our agency, our attorneys did a class action again, did a complaint to the federal court, and we won. And now, if you guys will notice, the SIS is not being used anymore for the budget. You can use the SIS if you want to provide an evaluation for your family member, but it's not the only thing that's used to consider a budget. Now it's still important to go back to a doctor, to get doctor's letters to justify the Medicaid in the program and fund the program. So other things with Medicaid, there are people who are on self-directed community-based programs. Remember, we changed the way when Centennial Care came in. We were Salud for a while, and then we turned into Centennial Care. When Centennial Care came in, we changed the way we were providing some waivers. And now we have something called the self-directed community benefit. We have MeVia, remember, the DD waiver. And a lot of people have been switching over to MeVia. MeVia is still cut out, but it's supposed to be absorbed into the greater Centennial waiver, like the self-directed community benefit. My son is on the self-directed community benefit. He was in our state psychiatric institution, and he was miserable there. He was beat up there. He went out for a while and got in a boarding home, and those boarding homes have no regulation. It's just horrible. And then he got back into the institution again, and I was able, with the state, to get him out and get him first into a group program and then into a self-directed community benefit program where he has staff that come to his house and help him get blood draws and help him go to the doctor and help get him more involved with the community so he doesn't isolate himself. Takes him to the grocery store. He's really into shopping and cooking right now. Even though he's on a nothing budget, he's on food stamps and SSI. He's got a life. He's got choices now. But what's happening? What did Michelle talk about? Some of the problems are going to be, what if we go into a block grant and we change the way Medicaid is provided into the community? What if that happens? We may lose our home and community-based programs. My son is so happy with his caregiver right now. His life is full, and he would be happy to live the rest of his life in a studio apartment, being able to go to the zoo, being able to go to museums, being able to cook for himself and cook for me with the help of this support that we have. If that goes away, then we're back to the revolving door of him going in and out of psychiatric hospitals at $10,000 a pop. So there's so much with, so we lobby, we were able to provide one lobbyist within our agency, and we can only educate our legislators. We're not allowed to lobby the rest of us. But what we're doing for trying to serve people on that self-directed community benefit, if they lose their hours, which we're finding the managed care organizations often want to cut way back and reduce the costs every year. Many people come to us and say, I had like 52 hours and now I'm being cut back. Or I'm on the MeVia waiver and I had several hours from a personal care attendant, and now they cut that way back to maybe 15 hours a week. And so we'll have attorneys that will take those cases and take them to hearing with Medicaid. And we've won many of those cases and got them their hours back. So we have people coming to us saying, I want to be on the DD waiver. I have a family member who really got a head injury younger in life before they were 22, but the state's saying it's more mental illness than it is developmental disabilities or intellectual impairments. And we're able to take those cases to hearing, and in some cases we win. And those people then are able to be living their lives to their potential and living in the community, not just being forced to live in group homes or with no services at all. So many Medicaid types of cases that we look at. One thing that's come up very recently is there was a class action lawsuit from the Center on Law and Poverty, and they said to the state, wait a minute, you're bumping all these people off of Medicaid automatically with your computers. And it's just all of a sudden, you go to the mail one day and you get a notice and it says, your Medicaid will be ending at the end of this month. And people are saying, well, that's not right. I haven't done anything wrong. Why is my Medicaid ending? Now my caregiver's not going to be able to be paid. Now my therapist can't be paid. Now I can't go to the doctor and get my medications paid for because all of my services are ending because Medicaid is ending. Well, the judge said to the Center of Law and Poverty, we're going to stop that. We're going to stop that for a certain period of time. So for a couple of years, there was a stay on the number of people on the waiver that were their services were ending from this automatic stop. Suddenly that stay came to an end and Medicaid jumped back in there and started cutting people off of Medicaid again. In some cases, they had a right to do that, and maybe maybe the person didn't meet the medical qualification, maybe they had too much money in their bank account, maybe there were good reasons for it. But now I'm seeing many people who are on the DD waiver and on Medicaid being bumped off when they got all of their paperwork in, and they shouldn't have been bumped off. One woman who is the caregiver for an individual, she couldn't pay for her rent anymore. So she had to get out of her rent contract and pay $1,000 to get off of it, and then her car was repoed. Well, I got the person back onto Medicaid, and they went back retroactively 3 months, and that person was able to turn in their timesheets and get services paid for. But what about that $1,000 that she lost with her? Now she'll be able to find another apartment, but there are some painful things that are happening to people. So if you know anyone, or if you yourselves are having problems with being terminated from Medicaid, you guys who are on the DD waiver get recertification every year. And some of those are going to the wrong addresses, or there's various reasons why you're getting bumped off of Medicaid. So you may want to check on that. We're very involved with the Know Your Rights campaign, and some of you may know what that's been doing. We've been working, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare, which is where we all get our Medicaid from across the country. They're saying by the year 2020, we have to have more person-centered programs. We can't be just having the providers kind of do what's easier. We need to figure out ways for people who want their individual programs and have made certain choices in their life. We need to support that, and we need to support that with our Medicaid dollars. And so did you have a question about that?
Yeah, it seems kind of like a catch-22 because it's a great idea, but there's no support staff that we need to bring people in who are trained to do these things. I mean, for my home health aide for my daughter, I had to find the person and then get her employed by the agency because there just are no people who are qualified. We don't have any. We're going to shortage it.
And you're absolutely right. We've been going around with DDSD, the Developmental Disabilities Service Division, and Disability Rights New Mexico has been on the steering committee for that, and we've been very involved in editing the draft developmental disabilities waiver that's going to be coming out to try to make it more person-centered. But how do we do that? This is the questions that's being asked by a family member. How do we do that when we don't even have enough service providers who could allow for the choice? You know, here's an example of what I'm saying. If we had 8 people in a group home, and maybe 5 of the people wanted to go bowling, but the other people did not want to go bowling. What do? The way we do it now is we take everybody and we get them in the car and we force those people who don't want to go bowling to go bowling. So how do we make our Medicaid dollars? That's why we really need to have parents coming to these Know Your Right campaign meetings, and why we need parents to be involved with the editing and the questioning of some of the proposed regulations to make sure that this is a new thing that's going across the country. And how do we really support those people? Do we have enough money to do it? We're saying right now, no, it just seems like it's going to be impossible to do this. But it's not something that we're going to be able to do alone, and we can't expect the state to be doing this on their own and making these decisions. We have to be very involved to make sure that, that these rights are protected. And I end up, even when I get calls from people saying, I'm a person with developmental disabilities, and I want to, even though I've been having lots and lots of seizures and I'm very off balance, I want to be able to live more independently. I don't want to live in a group home. I don't want someone hovering over me when I'm trying to put a casserole in the oven saying, you can't do that by yourself because you might fall over. Some of these people want to take these risks. I'll tell you, I was really freaked out with my own son because I didn't think he was ready to move from a group home into the self-directed community benefit waiver. And it sort of frightened me because I thought, now he's not going to be with surveillance or somebody watching him 24 hours a day. So there was a lot of letting go that I had to deal with. And in the long run, I'm realizing that that he's making some good choices. And even in developing his budget, I'm thinking, oh, you want this, you want to have a smartphone, you want to have massage therapy, you want to have internet in your house. No, Mom, I don't want to have those things. I choose not to have those things, and I have to back off. And I found that he is living the life but it's going to have to be give and take on some of the guardians and the parents too as we move through this. But we're in the initial stages of it, and I think it's good because we're way ahead of other states in at least looking at these issues. And yeah, getting a little horrified because are we going to have enough money for it? What if we go into a block grant? Then we really won't be able we may not be able to fund the services that we need. I think one of the things that I've been doing from disability rights is we've been working closer with allies. We used to call it allies in self-advocacy, but now we've just changed it to allies in advocacy. And there's a lot of people with developmental disabilities who really want to promote self-determination and things like voting. I mean, if everybody with disabilities voted, I think we would have a big change in who the current, how we would get Medicaid, because those people would be giving their voice to who we actually vote for and what kind of legislation we push through. So, we had a grant called SAVE, where we worked with people with developmental disabilities, this allies group, and disability rights. I was involved with those trainings too, and we went to different developmental disabilities programs, and we talked about voting and how do you vote. And our agency had developed a workbook on knowing who is our county clerk and what happens, because one of the persons, for example, has very little ability to move. And so he goes with his care coordinator, his caregiver, to vote. And sometimes he's stopped and people will say, "You don't have a right to vote." And he'll say, through the caregiver, he'll say, "Yes, I do." And he has a voice, a box that speaks for him. And so he's able to let his voice be heard, that yes, he does have a right to vote. He doesn't have a guardian, and this is his caregiver, and he wants to go in there and he's going to vote for who he wants to vote for. Not who the caregiver wants to vote for, who he wants to vote for. And people who even have guardians have a right to vote if it hasn't been removed by the courts. Okay? So I think I've probably talked about a number of the issues that we work on in our agency, at least I think those that might be relevant to this particular group. And I don't even know how long I've been talking. I bet I've been going way.
I just have a quick question for you, because I was at the Center for
Law and Poverty.
Law and Poverty. They had a fundraiser yesterday, and they were talking about, that this case is going forward very promisingly, but it's going to be a long, long battle, just like what you're talking about with the cases. And one of the things I'm curious about is, are you involved with them in that suing the system in terms of making sure that there's a strong voice for the disabilities community?
Yes.
Okay.
So, like what we're doing now is.
Can you explain to the crowd what it's about with that lawsuit and how you're tied with it? Because I don't know if
Well, I don't know if I can explain for the Center on Law and Poverty what they're doing, but they, are you talking about the lawsuit in particular with Medicaid?
Well, it's the education. It's education about all kids from all backgrounds deserve an education. There should be no, this school doesn't have enough textbooks and that school has, kids to go to the state fair or whatever. Is this the equality to all students, no matter what level of poverty or whatever? But I didn't hear them mention anything about disabilities. And I just want to make sure the disabilities community is voice being heard, because if that lens, if they win, the wording needs to be such that disabilities is not excluded. And so I'm just concerned, is the disabilities community being able to weigh in on this before it gets settled?
Okay, so this is a lawsuit that I am unaware of. The lawsuit that I'm aware of with the Center of Law and Poverty, which they're still working on, is still with Medicaid to make sure that people are not being excluded from Medicaid, that really, and that the paperwork is being done in a timely manner, and that those kinds of services are appropriate and are being done properly. The lawsuit that you're talking about is, it sounds like it's more education oriented. And as soon as you said that, a number of thoughts came to my mind. One is we were just hearing Michelle talk about the serious concern that we have about regulations. Already with the Department of Education, some of the regulations are being removed and challenged. So we're trying to look carefully at the regulations that are being removed to make sure that we still are allowing people to have a free, appropriate public education. Because if you have a disability, you have a right to that, whether you're under special education or whether you're under a 504 plan. Or you're entitled because family members pay for their taxes, and so you're entitled to a free, appropriate public education even if you have a disability. But we are working closely with the Medicaid issue, and we've now been giving information about clients that have been served inappropriately by HSD. So that there's give and take on different clients. We don't want to overlap too much, but we're taking more of the individual clients. They're doing the class action on the Medicaid issue. But I will definitely look into the educational issue to make sure that we have a voice for people with disabilities, because I think more than ever it's going to be incredibly important, especially if we lose IDEA, special education regulations, or lose some of the 504 capabilities. I've been hearing that we're not as able to do Office of Civil Rights complaints, which is the avenue that you pursue if there's a discrimination under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So there's just so much to be aware of. Luckily, I have attention deficit disorder. So I have no ability to kind of prioritize things, and I can be distracted easily, and that can be a bad thing, but it can also be a really good thing, because it's like my antenna are up all the time for disability issues, and particularly disability issues, mainly because of I grew up with a disability, and it's an invisible disability, and my son has a serious mental illness. So these issues are important to me. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do we know any more about the ABLE Act, when it will happen in New Mexico?
Well, it's already apparently taking effect. I was considering trying to access it myself, but you can access it through other states.
I know, but what about New Mexico?
Well, New Mexico is going to have to begin to do their own like a division in some sort of government agency to begin to try to do the ABLE Act, but I don't know whether I don't think it's been started. I was talking with an attorney who was suggesting that maybe we could push the legislators to try to work more towards that, and you may want to talk with me about how could we do that. Right now the ABLE Act is, you can access it for your child, and it allows you to have much more savings that aren't going to affect your government benefits, okay, and to put much more money in it on a yearly basis. So there's going to be a lot more freedom to do that, and you can do it now using the other states' their own mechanisms that are done. I think Ohio has a good mechanism for using the ABLE Act. Have you tried to do that?
No, I wanted to be in New Mexico. This is where we live. This is our home. Why do I have to go online to Ohio, where I can't even go and talk to a banker if I need to, or whatever, because you have to do through a bank?
Right.
So I was wondering, since it is federal law, when is New Mexico going to start
Implementing. So she wants to know when is New Mexico going to start implementing it themselves? And I think that given all the other stuff that is going on federally, I think it's going to have to be more of a grassroots effort to do that. And so how would we do that? And I think we can probably do that if we work together as parents, family members, and those that are really interested in trying to use this incredible opportunity to save for our family members, or those of you that have disabilities, if you want to try to be able to save more, because we've been trapped into this this cycle of poverty, and with just SSI and you know, if you're lucky, SSDI, but then sometimes that complicates things and doesn't allow you to get onto Medicaid. So if we can figure out ways to do this and do it locally, you know, I'd be really excited to hear from you, and let's try to contact. I know some attorneys that are helping with this, and so we could maybe get a group of us, attorneys, parents, and just interested advocates who would like to come, and we could try to develop an approach, and how do we go to the legislature with this. I've done that on developing memorials before and been successful. So let's figure out how to do it with this ABLE Act. I think it's a great suggestion. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we're on to the next speaker, but I just have a quick question. So that list I'm going to get together of everybody being able to see the videos, is it possible some of you could maybe make a note?
I already started one. It's going around.
And do you want to maybe have that sent to you so that
that would be wonderful.
Is that all right with everybody? I think the more we can stay in one circle and keep circulating this information, the more it's going to be really helpful, especially with the elections coming up.
Right. And do you have a card?
I don't have one with me, but Disability Rights New Mexico, there's only one phone number, the main phone number that I'm going to give you, 1-800-432-4682, and you can contact me even out of state. It'll come to me through that. The local number is 505-256-3100. There are 3 offices, but I've given you the number for the main office. Again, my name is Joan, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you.